Trust is the basis for all action, and this incident is indicative of a lack of trust, a lack of collaboration on an issue which is a global challenge which is faced by all of us and most of all by the developing countries that are not responsible for it. But we've seen what you have done. We absolutely object to this unfair means followed for adoption.
This statement by the Indian delegate Chandni Raina captured the collective frustration of developing countries and small island nations regarding the outrageous climate finance outcome of COP29. As the conference ended in the wee hours of November 24, close to 36 hours beyond the scheduled closure, there is much to contemplate and little to hope regarding the state of finance that has been forced upon the global south by the developed countries. Earlier, on the night of November 23, 2024, the LDC and SIDS negotiators walked out of consultations on a text that offered a meager $300 billion from developed countries and other sources by 2035 to developing countries. This was after a decade-long discussions on a new collective quantified goal. The $300 billion amount was fixed despite the pressing demand of the G77 and China to allocate $1.3 trillion of funds as part of NCQG. The negotiators were also demanding the $600 billion of the $1.3 trillion should be public grant or grant equivalent finance, which essentially puts the responsibility of adaptation and mitigation on the historical polluters. Instead, the text calls on the actors to enable scaled-up climate finance for developing countries to at least $1.3 trillion per year by 2035 and encourages developing countries to contribute towards this target on a voluntary basis. This dilutes the legal obligation of developed countries to provide the entirety of the finance under the goal. So what does the $300 billion mean for the Global South? The Global South is home to over 6 billion people. If we do a rough calculation on per capita allocation, it comes down to just $50 per person per year. Essentially, this is the fund allocated by the developed countries for all loss and damage, adaptation and mitigation needs of developing countries. But according to the UNFCCC's second needs determination report, a cumulative $5.012 to $6.852 trillion is required until 2030 to support developing countries in achieving their NDCs. This gap in adaptation only shows dismal levels of ambition from developed countries. Furthermore, the quantum and the timeline of the finance are also raising major issues.
And the reason that what's on the table right now is such a bad deal is that in addition to the low number and the low quality, the language actually would support the US and other developed countries to be able to say, actually, we no longer have any obligation to provide climate finance to the Global South. This is the end game in many ways of a decades-long strategy led by the US to exit from their obligations under the climate regime. It's much vaguer language, and it's essentially an abdication of responsibility from the US and the Global North.
India had an unusually aggressive response on the matter and criticized the developed countries for undermining the principle of equity. India does not accept the goal proposal in its present form. The amount that is proposed to be mobilized is abysmally poor. It is a paltry sum. It is not something that will enable conducive climate action that is necessary for the survival of our country. As the COP29 comes to a disappointing end, the Global North has essentially abandoned the South with this meager offer of $300 billion. The ambiguities of the goal make it clear that there will be little accountability and traceability of funds. This was the last remaining window for the North to step up, pay its fair share, and restore some semblance of trust in the multilateral process. The next edition of COP is scheduled to be held in Belém, Brazil, in November 2025, with emphasis on global and regional environmental issues.